I am Rowan Hayes, 42 years old. Yet within the esteemed Hayes family, I find myself labeled as the disappointment in uniform. When my mother called regarding my sister's promotion party, her tone was as unyielding as cold steel. Enter through the back. It's better not to make her feel uncomfortable. A straightforward directive for the daughter they think merely organizes documents in Langley. What they remain unaware of is that their diligent worker has just returned from a harrowing journey, bringing 31 lost souls back with her. That haunting sensation, sharp and cold, settled deep within me as I navigated the road. But the final blow struck when I entered the kitchen, and my mother didn't even glance my way. Her eyes drifted beyond me, as though I were merely a forgotten piece of furniture. "I'm glad you made it," she said. The breath was stolen from my chest. I donned the smile I had honed for 2 decades, a polished facade to conceal the turmoil within. Have you ever found yourself donning a facade just to navigate the complexities of your own family? Share your story in the comments below, as that night, my journey was only starting. The autumn leaves of Potomac, Maryland, were a vibrant tapestry of gold and fire. Yet I found myself untouched by their beauty. I clutched the weathered steering wheel of my trusty Honda Accord, a familiar ache tightening in my chest. The echo of my mother's call from just a few days ago lingered in my mind, her voice sharp and lacking any tenderness. "Lila has a big party this Saturday," she declared, not inquired. "It's important for you to be there. And Rowan, please choose something more fitting than your usual practical attire. And please, for heaven's sake, refrain from sharing your little escapades. It's important to avoid putting her in an uncomfortable position." The last directive was conveyed with precision and impact. "Oh, and please use the kitchen entrance. The front drive is reserved for the senior officials." I convinced myself I had grown accustomed to it, yet the words pierced through me like a jagged piece of glass, carving into my heart. I complied with her instructions, maneuvering my vehicle into a hidden area next to the towering, brimming recycling bins. The aroma of wet leaves intertwined with the lingering odor of yesterday's catering as I entered through the service door and into the vibrant warmth of the kitchen. The head caterer, a stranger to me, halted his chopping and regarded me with the same inquisitive gaze he'd reserved for a fresh dishwasher. My mother, Eleanor, stood poised and elegant in a navy St. John dress, her posture flawless and unwavering. Her gaze lingered on me, a brief flash of judgment crossing her features, before her face settled into an unreadable mask. "Good, you're here," she remarked, her voice suggesting I was merely a task to be ticked off. She gestured with a flawlessly groomed finger toward a table overflowing with presents. "Your gift for Lila should be placed over there. And please, do not interrupt her before she gives her speech." She never inquired about my long 10-hour journey. There was an absence of embrace. She effortlessly shifted her focus, her mind already occupied with arranging a tray of lobster puffs. I navigated the dazzling throng, a sense of disconnection enveloping me. My father, Richard, was engrossed in a lively discussion with the senator, sharing laughter over a joke that remained just out of my earshot. He gave me a brisk nod from across the room, a political acknowledgement, not a fatherly one. Then Lila appeared. She was a vision in a silk gown, gliding through the room like a queen in her court. She spotted me and made a show of it. "Oh, there you are," she called out, her voice loud enough for the nearby cluster of guests to turn. She draped an arm around my shoulders, her touch feeling more like a restraint. "Everyone," she announced with a sugary, condescending smile. "This is my sister, Rowan. She works for the government, some desk job over in Langley." I think a few polite, well-bred chuckles rippled through the air, the kind that cut deeper than any outright insult. I felt the hot flush of blood rush to my face, but I held my smile. It was a stiff, brittle thing, a mask I had worn for 2 decades. In that moment, surrounded by the hum of champagne-fueled conversation, I realized the truth. In their world, I wasn't just invisible. I was an embarrassment to be managed. They didn't know that what they saw as my failure was the very shield that protected these lavish parties. The muffled sound of laughter and clinking glasses followed me as I escaped through the French doors onto the back terrace. The chilly autumn air was a welcome shock, a clean blade cutting through the suffocating perfume and pretense inside. I leaned against the cold stone balustrade, my breath fogging in the dim light, trying to slow the frantic beating of my heart. That was when I saw it. My throat closed instantly. It was propping open one of the heavy doors, a simple utilitarian doorstop against the evening breeze. But it wasn't a brick or a block of wood. It was a folded American flag. Not just any flag, it was the flag, the one that had draped the casket of my teammate, David. After he fell beside me in Damascus, I had no home to speak of, no mantelpiece to place it on, so I had entrusted it to my mother for safekeeping, a sacred trust. Now its crisp, ceremonial folds were collecting dust on the flagstone, one corner already beginning to fray against the rough surface. For them, a symbol of ultimate sacrifice, it was nothing more than a convenient household object. Slowly, reverently, I knelt and picked it up. I brushed the dust from the stars with the palm of my hand, the wool fabric feeling both heavy and hollow. It felt like holding a ghost. This quiet, thoughtless desecration hurt more than any of their barbed words. Leaving the chatter of the party behind, I sought refuge in my father's library. The room was a sanctuary of mahogany and leather, a mausoleum dedicated to the approved successes of the Hayes lineage. The walls were a gallery of achievement. There was Lila shaking hands with the governor, my brother in his dress uniform receiving a commendation, diplomas from Yale and Georgetown, awards, promotions, and wedding photos, all displayed in heavy, ornate frames. I scanned the wall, searching for a trace of myself. I knew there was only one picture that included me, a family portrait from when I was 19. I found the frame, but I wasn't in it, where my younger self should have been standing, awkwardly, next to Lila. There was now just a sliver of the manicured lawn behind us. I ran my finger along the edge of the photograph inside the glass. The cut was clumsy, a jagged line where I had been surgically removed. My Aunt Carol's voice echoed in my memory from a holiday years ago. She had mentioned it in passing, a piece of harmless family gossip. "Oh, Eleanor got a new, smaller frame, and you just didn't fit, dear," she'd said with a shrug. "She had to crop you out to balance the composition. I wasn't a daughter. I was a disruptive element in their perfect picture, staring at that empty space, that void where I was supposed to be. I felt the truth of it sink into my bones. I had been excised from their narrative long before I ever left home. That blank space in the frame pulled me back, further down the rabbit hole of memory, to the day the excision began. 20 years ago, I was standing in this very same room, the air thick with the scent of lemon polish and my father's disappointment. I hadn't dropped out of the FBI Academy. I had been handpicked, recruited by a quiet man in a nondescript gray suit, who met me on the grounds of Quantico and spoke of a clandestine program that didn't officially exist, a program that required me to vanish. When I tried to explain it to my parents, there was no pride, only a chilling silence. My father, Richard, stood by the fireplace, his face a mask of stern disapproval. He finally spoke, his voice low and heavy with the weight of his verdict. "So you're quitting," he said. It wasn't a question. "What are we supposed to tell people? That Richard Hayes' daughter couldn't handle the pressure." He looked at me as if I were a stranger who had just brought shame upon his house. "You've turned this family's legacy into an embarrassment." My mother's reaction was quieter and somehow far worse. She sat in her favorite armchair, and her only movement was the delicate, almost silent clink of her porcelain teacup returning to its saucer. She looked at me, not with anger, but with a kind of resigned pity that was infinitely more crushing. "Not everyone is meant to be exceptional, Rowan," she said, her voice soft, gentle, and utterly devastating. That single sentence had become the soundtrack of my life, a quiet, constant reminder of the failure they had assigned to me. I pulled myself back to the present. Standing alone in the silent library, I was still holding David's flag, clutching it to my chest. They celebrated success with framed photographs and plaques on the wall. They built a shrine to the polished, public-facing symbols of honor. They praised the medals, I thought, but they are terrified of the scars that earned them. The scars they couldn't see were the ones that defined me. My life was a collection of moments they would never understand, lived in stark, silent contrast to their world of polished silver and political handshakes. The memory that surfaced most often was from a Christmas 3 years ago, while my family was gathered around a roaring fireplace in their Maryland mansion, the scent of roasting turkey and pine filling the air. I was a world away. I was sitting on a cold, concrete floor in a derelict safe house in Kabul, Afghanistan. My Christmas dinner was a chalky protein bar and a bottle of lukewarm water. Outside, the distant, sporadic pop-pop-pop of gunfire was the only carol I heard. My eyes were glued to a grainy monitor, tracking the movements of a high-value target. I couldn't move, couldn't sleep, couldn't look away for a second. For a fleeting, foolish moment, I pulled out my satellite phone and opened Instagram. Lila had just posted a photo. The whole family was there, beaming, raising glasses of red wine. My father had his arm around her. The caption read, "Family is everything. Just wishing everyone was here with us tonight." A bitter, humorless laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. I was the everyone who wasn't there. I was the ghost in their machine, the unseen cog, ensuring they could post their hollow, sentimental captions in blissful peace. I snapped the phone shut. The ensuing silence in that dusty room was absolute, and the loneliness was a physical presence, colder and more piercing than the Afghan winter night. That loneliness was a constant companion, but it was sharpest in the aftermath of a mission. It became a living thing after Operation Starlight. The memories of that op didn't come back softly. They came in flashes of fire and chaos. It was a hostage rescue in a fortified compound in Libya. The plan went sideways the moment we hit the ground. Intel was bad. The target building was rigged. I had a split second to make a call, follow the exfiltration plan, and save the primary hostage, or divert and risk everything for a group of civilians, 3 children among them, who were about to be caught in the crossfire of the local militia, the manual, the training, my orders. They all screamed for me to stick to the primary objective. I made a different call. We got the children out. We got all the civilians out. But the delay cost us. It cost us David. And it cost us Mark. I came back to base with 3rd-degree burns on my forearms and a hole in my heart that would never fully close. There was no medal ceremony, no press conference, just a classified after-action report that would be buried in a vault, and the recurring nightmares that became my new bedfellows. A few weeks later, when I finally felt steady enough to call home, I got my father on the line. I just wanted to hear a familiar voice. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask where I was. His first and only question was, "Are you still doing that nameless job of yours? When are you going to get a real career?" Rowan. I clicked the phone off, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. The chasm between my reality and their perception of it was too vast to ever be bridged. Back in the present, I stood in the sterile silence of a cheap motel room off the interstate, the kind with thin walls and bolted down furniture. The faint smell of bleach hung in the air. I winced as I peeled the old dressing off a wound on my shoulder. It was a souvenir from a close-quarters fight in a crowded Istanbul bazaar. A long, ugly gash from a knife that had gotten too close. The stitches had come out, but it had flared up again, angry and red. With the practiced deficiency of a field medic, I cleaned the wound with an antiseptic wipe from my go bag, applied a fresh layer of ointment, and skillfully wrapped it in a clean bandage. I did it all without a mirror, by feel alone. My hands were steady. My movements were sure. This was my life, stripped bare, a solitary existence of patching up my own wounds, both the visible and the invisible. In the quiet anonymity of rented rooms, I didn't need their pity. I didn't even want their understanding anymore. But as I caught my reflection in the dim bathroom mirror, I saw the profound exhaustion in my eyes. I saw the fine lines etched there, not by age, but by too many sunrises, seen from the wrong side of the world, and a deep, aching wish surfaced. A desire so fierce it startled me. I just wished, for once, they could see me, not the failure, not the dropout, but the survivor. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the glass, and whispered to the tired face staring back, "You're still here, Rowan, and that's enough." But was it? Sometimes, in the dead of night, I wonder if there is anyone on this earth who can look at me and not see my family's shadow looming behind. I didn't go back to the motel. The thought of those 4 beige walls felt more suffocating than ever. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the streets of D.C., the wounds of the evening still raw and bleeding. On impulse, I found myself in Georgetown, pulling up outside the Tombs, a classic subterranean bar with brick walls and low, wood-beamed ceilings. The kind of place no one in my family, with their preference for sterile, high-end hotel lounges, would ever set foot in. I slid onto a worn wooden stool at the far end of the bar, the scent of old beer and oak, a strangely comforting blanket. I ordered a bourbon, needing the burn to chase away the chill in my soul. I was staring into the amber liquid, swirling it in my glass, when a deep, familiar voice rumbled beside me. "Rowan Hayes, I'll be damned. I don't believe my eyes." I looked up, and my breath caught. It was Marcus Vance, my old instructor from the farm, the CIA's training grounds in the Virginia countryside. He looked older now, his dark hair turned a distinguished silver, but his eyes were the same, crinkled at the corners with a deep, knowing warmth. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be retired, fishing on some lake in Montana. He pulled up the stool next to me, signaling the bartender for a beer. He didn't ask about my family, didn't offer empty platitudes about the party I'd obviously just fled. He looked me in the eye, a real appraising look, That situation in Tripoli last year, he said, his voice low and serious. I heard you handled that with a cool head. Damn good work. For a moment, I couldn't speak. It was the first time in years, decades maybe, that someone had spoken to me about my work not as a nameless job or a little adventure, but with the quiet, profound respect of a fellow professional. A warmth spread through my chest, chasing away some of the ice. I just did my job, Marcus, I managed to say. He grunted, taking a long sip of his beer. Don't sell yourself short. Kid, never do that. We sat in comfortable silence for a while before he spoke again. You look like you could use a real meal. My place is just a few blocks from here. I make a mean chili. I hesitated for only a second before nodding. Anything was better than returning to the crushing loneliness of my motel room. His apartment was small but clean. A bachelor pad filled with books and old maps. The air smelled of coffee and wood polish. My wife, Helen, passed last year, he said softly, as if sensing my unspoken question. He moved around the small kitchen with an easy, practiced grace. It's nice to have someone to cook for once in a while. He handed me a steaming bowl of thick, dark chili and a slice of skillet-fried cornbread, golden and crisp at the edges. We sat at his small kitchen table, under the warm glow of a single hanging lamp. We didn't talk about my family. We talked about the life we knew, about old campaigns and fallen comrades. I found myself telling him about Operation Starlight, the words tumbling out of me, recounting the impossible choice, the fire, the loss of David and Mark. I told him everything I had locked away, everything I had carried alone for so long. He just listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice, didn't judge. He just let me speak until the story was finished, until the silence settled back into the room, heavy but no longer painful. When I was done, he simply nodded, his gaze steady and kind. You made the right call. Kid, he said, his voice firm. Compassion isn't a weakness in our line of work. It's the whole damn point. It's the strongest weapon we've got. And just like that, the dam I had so carefully constructed inside me for 20 years finally broke. A tear slid down my cheek, then another. Hot, silent tears of grief and gratitude and a relief so profound it was dizzying. Marcus didn't say a word. He just slid a box of tissues across the table toward me and let me cry. When I was finally ready to leave, my shoulders feeling lighter than they had in years, Marcus stopped me at the door. He pressed a small, heavy object into my hand. It was a small, antique brass compass, its glass face scratched and its edges worn smooth with time. It saw me through 3 wars, he said, closing my fingers around it. It's yours now, so you can always find your way home. He paused, and his eyes met mine with an intensity that anchored me. And remember this, Rowan, home isn't the place you were born. It's the place where they're waiting for you. His words were a balm, a healing salve on a wound I didn't even know was still open. For the first time, I felt like I had a place to belong, a family not of blood, but of spirit. I was no longer a lone ship in the storm. Someone was holding a light for me. As I turned to go, he added one last thing, his voice a low, cautionary note. Be careful, Rowan. The people who are used to you living in their shadow won't like it when you start to shine. For a week, I lived on the quiet warmth that Marcus had given me. I carried the weight of his compass in my pocket, a constant, solid reminder that I wasn't entirely alone. For the first time in a long time, a fragile sense of hope began to take root in the barren soil of my heart. Maybe things could be different. Maybe I could be different. Then my phone rang. The caller ID read, Richard Hayes. My father never called me, ever. A cold knot of suspicion tightened in my stomach, but I pushed it down and answered. Rowan, he began, his voice infused with the practiced artificial warmth I knew all too well from his years in politics. How are you doing? Sweetheart, I'm fine. Dad, what's wrong? I asked, cutting through the pretense. He chuckled, a dry, hollow sound, always straight to the point. Aren't you? Listen, I was just calling to chat. Heard from a friend of mine that you know Senator Peterson quite well. Had a drink with him last year at that fundraiser, didn't you? The knot in my stomach turned to ice. I had provided security oversight for Peterson's diplomatic trip to the Middle East. We weren't friends. We had a professional relationship built on mutual respect. I know him, I said carefully. Wonderful, wonderful, he boomed. Well, as it happens, he's the swing vote on the Appropriations Committee for a new counterterrorism funding project, a project Leela is heading up. It would be a huge step for her career. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. I was just thinking, if you had a moment, you could put in a good word. You know, for the family. For the family. The three words they always used to disguise a demand. There was no inquiry about my life, no mention of the party, no curiosity about my well-being. I was simply a tool to be used, a contact in his Rolodex to be leveraged for Lila's advancement. My skills, my network, my entire dangerous hidden life. It was all invisible until the moment it could serve their ambition. I'll see what I can do. I lied, my voice flat. That's my girl, he said, the false warmth returning, and then he hung up. The next day, my mother called. Her approach was different, more refined, but no less predatory. She invited me to lunch at the Hay Adams, a place overlooking the White House. Known for its power lunches and exorbitant prices, a place she knew I detested. I met her there, feeling out of place in my simple slacks and blouse. Amidst the sea of dark power suits and Chanel ensembles, Eleanor was in her element, perfectly coiffed, wearing a cream-colored Chanel blazer that probably cost more than my car. For 20 minutes, she spoke of meaningless things. Her upcoming trip to Tuscany, a charity gala, the brilliance of Lila's recent work. She stirred her iced tea with a long silver spoon, the picture of detached elegance. Then she laid her trap. Rowan, dear, she began, setting her spoon down with a soft click. Your father told me he spoke with you. It's so important that you help your sister with this. You owe it to this family. A humorless laugh almost escaped me. Owe you, I said, keeping my voice low and even. After everything, you think I owe you something. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes went cold. It was like watching a pleasant day freeze over in an instant. I think you owe us your loyalty. We gave you everything. A good name, an education, opportunities you chose to throw away. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You've always been selfish, Rowan, only thinking of yourself and your strange, secretive life. It's no wonder you never got anywhere. Lila, on the other hand, understands duty. Mom, I said, my patience gone. I don't owe anyone anything. The final and most direct assault came that evening. There was a sharp knock on my motel room door. I opened it to find Lila holding a bottle of expensive Cabernet and smiling a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Big sister, she purred, brushing past me into the small room. I know you're mad, but I came to make peace. She set the wine down on the cheap laminate desk. I just wanted you to know, I appreciate you considering helping me. I'm not helping you, Lila, I said, closing the door. Her smile tightened for a fraction of a second. Don't be like that. Think of it as a trade. You help me and I can help you. She looked around the drab room with theatrical pity. I have connections now. I could talk to some people at the bureau. Find a more suitable position for you. Something real. A desk. A pension. Proper benefits. It's the least I can do. It wasn't an offer. It was the ultimate insult. A bribe wrapped in condescension. She was offering to rescue me from the very life of sacrifice and significance that she was incapable of understanding, dangling the success she had been handed as a prize for my compliance. I looked straight at her, my anger a cold, hard stone in my gut. I don't need you to find me a job, Lila, and I'm not going to use the relationships I've bled for to advance your career. The false smile vanished completely, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated venom. Her face hardened. Fine, she hissed, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. Be that way. She grabbed her purse, leaving the wine on the desk like a piece of abandoned evidence. At the door, she paused and looked back at me, her eyes glittering with malice. Then don't blame me, she said. She had just declared war, and she had no idea who she was picking a fight with. Lila's threat, don't blame me, hung in the stale air of my motel room long after she'd gone. It was a promise. I just didn't know how quickly she intended to keep it. A few days later, I was back at the Tombs, sharing a quiet beer with Marcus. It was the only place in the city that felt like a sanctuary. My phone, sitting face down on the dark wood of the bar, suddenly began to vibrate incessantly. Not a single call, but a cascade of text messages, one after another, from colleagues I hadn't spoken to in months. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, snaked its way up my spine. I picked up the phone. The first message was a link from a former analyst. No text, just the link. I tapped it. My blood ran cold. It was an article on a prominent, aggressively right-leaning political blog, the kind that specialized in DC insider scandals. The headline was a loaded question: Operation Starlight, CIA heroism or reckless endangerment? My hands started to shake as I read. The article was a masterpiece of insinuation and character assassination. It painted a picture of a rogue agent, me, who, driven by ego, ignored protocol and directly caused the deaths of 2 American operatives just to save a few unnamed foreign nationals. It hinted at a massive cover-up by the agency to avoid embarrassment, but it was the sourcing that stopped my heart. The entire narrative, the article claimed, was based on information from a source close to the Hayes family, who has long been concerned about the agent's instability. A source close to the Hayes family, Lila. She hadn't just threatened me. She had taken the most sacred, painful moment of my professional life, the mission that cost me David and Mark, and twisted it into a weapon. She was desecrating their memory, painting their sacrifice as a consequence of my supposed incompetence. This wasn't just about undermining my career anymore. This was a violation. This was a desecration. The years of quiet dismissals, of being treated like a ghost, were nothing compared to this. This was a betrayal of the dead. A white-hot rage, purer and more potent than any I had ever felt, burned away every last shred of my carefully constructed composure. I threw a few bills on the bar, muttered a clipped, "I have to go," to a bewildered Marcus, and stormed out into the night. I didn't think, I just drove. The 10-mile drive to Lila's chic Georgetown condo felt like a 100-mile high-speed chase. I found a parking spot, abandoned my car, and buzzed her apartment. When the door clicked open, I pushed my way into the lobby and took the elevator up, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't knock. I shoved her apartment door open. The sound of light jazz and laughter spilled out. Lila was in the living room, holding a glass of white wine, surrounded by a small group of her fashionable, ambitious friends. They all turned to stare at me as I stood in the doorway, breathing heavily. Lila's face paled when she saw the look in my eyes. I didn't say a word. I just walked across her expensive Persian rug, held up my phone with the article displayed on the screen, and shoved it in her face. Silence descended upon the room. The jazz music suddenly sounded loud and obscene, and then one of Lila's friends, a vapid woman with a perfect blowout, giggled nervously and said the words that sealed my sister's fate. "Oh my God, Lila, you actually did it. I told you leaking that story would work." The admission hung in the air, naked and ugly. I saw the flash of fury in Lila's eyes, not at me, but at her friend's stupidity. The truth was out. She had intentionally, maliciously, used the deaths of my colleagues as a pawn in her petty game of sibling rivalry. A calculated move to prove her own superiority. I finally found my voice. It wasn't a shout. It was something far colder, far more dangerous. "You didn't just betray me," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a razor. "You betrayed the memory of the men who died, so you could stand here in your safe little world, drinking Sauvignon Blanc." I looked at each of her friends, their faces a mixture of shock and discomfort. Then my eyes locked back on Lila. I watched the last of the color drain from her face. I turned and walked out without another word. As I strode back to my car, the rage that had been a burning inferno inside me began to cool, crystallizing into something hard and clear. A diamond of pure, unadulterated resolve. The years of silence were over. I had let them define me, diminish me, and now desecrate the very core of who I am. No more. I got into my car, the engine roaring to life with a satisfying growl. I pulled out my secure, encrypted phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. It was answered on the second ring. "Director Carter's office. This is Rowan Hayes," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I need a meeting with the director immediately, and I need a keynote speaking slot at the upcoming National Security Conference." I paused, my next words forming the declaration of my own war. The topic will be lessons from nameless operations. The game had changed. They wanted a public fight. I was about to give them one. There comes a moment when you've been pushed too far, a moment when keeping silent is no longer an option. It's the moment you decide to fight back. If you know that feeling, if you've ever reached that breaking point, leave a single fire emoji in the comments. It's time to turn up the heat. The white-hot rage that had propelled me from the tombs had served its purpose. Now it was gone, replaced by something far more useful, a cold, clear, and absolute focus. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind the calm, focused mind of a field operative preparing for a mission. This was a different kind of battlefield, but the principles were the same. Know your objective, know your enemy, and assemble your weapons. The next morning, I was at Langley, sitting across a sterile conference table from Director David Carter. The room was a SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, soundproof and windowless, a place where secrets were currency. I didn't waste his time with family drama or emotional appeals. I laid it out for him, like an intelligence briefing, a targeted leak of classified operational details, a clear breach of national security originating from a domestic source, and the potential for significant damage to agency morale and credibility. I then presented my solution, not an internal investigation that would be buried, but a public correction of the narrative, a keynote address at the upcoming National Security Conference. Carter, a man known for his sharp mind and even sharper silences, listened without interruption. He steepled his fingers, his eyes boring into me, searching for any hint of emotional instability, of personal vendetta. He found none. He found only a senior officer presenting a strategic response to a threat. He was silent for a full minute, a minute that stretched into an eternity. Then he gave a single decisive nod. "You have 20 minutes on the main stage. Hayes," he said, his voice flat. "Don't make me regret this." It wasn't just permission. It was a validation. In that sterile, silent room, the head of the Central Intelligence Agency had given me his trust. He knew exactly what I was doing. The days that followed were a blur of methodical work. I was given access to a secure data center deep in the bowels of the agency headquarters, a cold, humming room filled with servers that held the unvarnished truth. This wasn't about revenge. It was about evidence. I wasn't building a case against my sister. I was building a fortress of facts. I pulled the full, unredacted, after-action report from Operation Starlight. I retrieved the encrypted audio logs from the mission, the frantic calls, the calm orders, the final, heartbreaking sign-offs from David and Mark. I accessed the declassified satellite imagery and the sworn debriefs from the surviving team members. Then came the hardest part, citing a clear national security imperative based on the leak. I filed a formal request for logs of all external communications from my sister's government-issued devices for the past month. The request was approved. The evidence was damning and irrefutable. A clear digital trail of encrypted emails and text messages between Lila and the political blogger. She hadn't just spoken to him. She had fed him a carefully curated, twisted version of the events, complete with operational details that only an insider could know. My weapons weren't going to be emotion or accusations. They were going to be time-stamped, undeniable facts. The night before the conference, I stood in my quiet motel room, the entire presentation loaded onto a single encrypted flash drive. My battlefield wardrobe was laid out on the bed. I hadn't chosen a power suit or an elegant dress. There would be no performance, only a presentation of truth. I had selected a simple charcoal gray silk blouse, a pair of tailored black trousers, and flat practical leather shoes. It was the uniform of a professional, an analyst, an expert. It didn't scream, "Look at me." It whispered, "Listen to me." As a final touch, I picked up a small, discreet pin from my jewelry case, the insignia of my old Special Activities Division unit. It was small enough to be almost unnoticeable to the uninitiated, but to the few in the audience who knew, it would speak volumes. It was a quiet signal of authenticity. I stood before the mirror, not to check my appearance, but to check my resolve. The reflection that stared back wasn't Rowan, the hurt daughter, the invisible sister. It was Hayes, a senior intelligence officer. The anger was gone. The pain was compartmentalized. All that was left was a calm, steely readiness. I was prepared. The next morning, the air backstage at the conference hall was thick with nervous energy and the smell of stale coffee. I could hear the low murmur of 1,000 attendees finding their seats. My family, I knew, would be in the front row. A courtesy extended to the family of a keynote speaker, a courtesy that would soon feel like a curse. I heard the moderator on stage begin my introduction, a career of distinguished, if quiet, service. I stood in the darkness of the wings, the small, heavy weight of the flash drive in my pocket. My heart wasn't racing. My hands were steady. I felt the familiar, focused calm that always settled over me just before an operation began. Please join me in welcoming Officer Rowan Hayes. The spotlight hit the stage. The applause began. This is the moment. I thought, that truth gets its voice back. The polite applause died down as I walked to the center of the stage. The heat of the spotlights felt like an interrogation lamp. But for the first time, I wasn't the one being interrogated. The auditorium was vast, a sea of expectant faces from every corner of the intelligence community. And there, in the front row, sat my family. It was a place of honor, a courtesy extended to the family of a keynote speaker. My father, Richard, looked proud in a detached political way. My mother, Eleanor, was a picture of poised composure. And Lila looked at me with a smirk of smug triumph. She thought she had won. She thought this was my public execution. I reached the lectern but didn't hide behind it. I took the wireless microphone, walked a few steps forward, and stood directly in the light. The large screen behind me remained blank. I didn't look at my family. I looked out at the audience, at the generals, the analysts, the field agents, and the policymakers. Good morning, I began, my voice calm and steady, amplified throughout the cavernous hall. The program says my topic today is emerging asymmetric threats, but I'm not going to talk about strategy. I'm going to tell you a story. It's about the true cost of intelligence. It's about the price of truth. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. This was not the dry academic presentation they were expecting. I saw Director Carter, sitting in the second row, give a nearly imperceptible nod. It's about a mission called Operation Starlight. I continued. I proceeded to walk them through it, not with charts and graphs, but with the visceral reality of the events. I spoke of the bad intel, the compromised safe house, the smell of dust and cordite. I spoke of the faces of the terrified civilians we found huddled in a basement. I spoke of David and Mark, not as statistics, but as men. I described David's stupid jokes that kept us sane during long surveillance shifts, and Mark's habit of always saving a piece of chocolate from his rations for the local kids. I made them real. I made the audience feel the weight of the impossible choice I faced in that moment of chaos. The entire hall was silent, captivated. Then I shifted my tone. The storyteller became the analyst. Recently, I said, my voice becoming sharper, more clinical, it has been suggested in certain public forums that this operation was, in fact, a reckless failure. It has been alleged that lives were lost due to an officer's ego, and that the events were subsequently covered up by the agency. I let the accusation hang in the air for a beat. Then, for the first time, I allowed my gaze to drift to the front row, right into Lila's eyes. This narrative, I said, my voice dropping but carrying a new weight, was unfortunately propagated by sources who sought to weaponize sacrifice for personal gain. I saw Lila stiffen. The smirk on her face faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. My father's brow furrowed. Disinformation is a powerful weapon, I stated, turning my attention back to the audience. It rarely works as one big lie. It's most effective when it's built from thousands of twisted truths. As I said the words, twisted truths, I clicked the remote in my hand. The massive screen behind me flickered to life. It wasn't a graph. It was a screenshot of an encrypted email from Lila's government-issued phone to the political blogger. The sender and receiver were clearly visible. I had redacted the blogger's name to maintain a professional high ground, but Lila's was there for all to see. Key phrases in the email body were highlighted in red. Phrases like reckless disregard for protocol and more concerned with her image than her team. And the most damning one, a tragic but avoidable loss. A collective gasp went through the auditorium. The silence was no longer captivated. It was electric with shock. I watched as my father's face went from confusion to disbelief, then to a horrified understanding. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her mask of composure shattering into a million pieces. But I kept my eyes on Lila. I watched as every ounce of color drained from her face, her smug confidence replaced by the raw, ugly face of panic. She looked trapped. She looked exposed. I clicked the remote again, but I didn't come here today to talk about betrayal, I said, my voice softening slightly as the screen behind me went dark. I came here to honor the real heroes. The screen lit up again, this time with the official, smiling portraits of Sergeant David Peterson and Officer Mark Chen. Their names appeared in bold letters beneath their faces. These were the men who gave their lives during Operation Starlight. I said, they did not die because of a reckless decision. They died because they made a courageous one. They died shielding the very civilians we were sent to save. I clicked the remote a final time. A short, grainy video began to play. It was a cell phone recording from one of the survivors, a message they had sent to the agency months later. A man with a tired face spoke in halting English, thanking the soldiers who came from the sky. Then the camera turned to his daughter, a little girl, no older than 10. She looked directly into the lens, her dark eyes wide and serious. The lady with the sad eyes, she said. She saved us. She saved my brother. The video ended. The screen went black. The silence in the room was absolute, profound. I took a deep breath and delivered my final volley. The value of an operative is not measured by the medals on their chest, but by the lives they save. The security of this nation is not built on ambition. It is built on compassion. It is built on the courage to make the hard choice, the right choice, no matter the personal cost. That is the true lesson of Operation Starlight. For a moment, there was nothing. Then a single person in the back began to clap. then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet, the sound of their applause, a deafening, rolling wave of validation. It washed over me, a sound I had never heard before, a sound I never knew I needed. I didn't look at the cheering crowd. My work with them was done. Instead, I looked directly at the front row. I saw the stunned horror on my father's face. I saw the shame warring with anger on my mother's, and in Lila's eyes, I saw the complete and utter devastation of a world that had just crumbled to dust around her. The game was over. The board had been flipped. I had won. But as the applause roared in my ears, why did it feel so much like a loss? The applause from the conference hall had faded, but the silence that replaced it was even louder. In the hours that followed my speech, my phone was a constant buzz of messages from colleagues, from Director Carter, even from Marcus, but there was nothing from my family. They didn't call. They didn't text. They simply vanished, retreating behind a wall of wounded pride. That evening, I drove back to the house in Potomac one last time. There were a few personal effects in my old room, a box of books, a photograph of a friend I'd lost, David's flag. I needed them. I needed to excise the last few remnants of my life from this place so I could finally be free of it. I let myself in with my key. The house was deathly quiet. I found them all in the grand living room, the one reserved for important guests. They were sitting in the dark, the only light coming from the flickering, flameless candles on the mantelpiece. It felt like walking into a wake. Lila was curled into a small ball on the sofa, her face puffy and stained with tears. My mother stared blankly at the cold hearth. My father stood by the window, a stiff silhouette against the darkening sky. He was the first to speak, his voice trembling with a rage that had been simmering all afternoon. "You've destroyed everything," he said, turning to face me. His face was a mask of fury. Everything. This family's name, your sister's career, all of it burned to the ground because of your selfishness. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I felt no fear, only a profound, weary sadness. "No, Dad," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I didn't destroy anything. I just told the truth." This family's obsession with its own image, Mom's willful silence, and Lila's ambition, that's what destroyed everything. The truth just turns on the lights. My mother finally stirred. She looked at me, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something other than disappointment in her eyes. It looked like fear. "Rowan, I'm sorry," she whispered, the words sounding foreign and brittle on her tongue. I didn't know. I was only trying to protect Lila." I shook my head slowly. "You weren't protecting her, Mom. You were enabling her. You taught her that ambition was more important than integrity." I took a breath, the words coming out calmly, without the anger I expected to feel. "And that apology isn't for me. It's for you. It's to make yourself feel better, now that the ugly truth is out in the open. But it's too late for that." I wasn't saying it to be cruel. I was saying it because it was a clinical fact. Forgiveness can't grow in soil that isn't tilled with genuine remorse. Theirs was a garden of regret for getting caught, not for the crime itself. I had to protect the small, fragile peace I had just won for myself. Finally, I walked over to the sofa, where Lila was hunched over, refusing to look at me. I stood before her for a long moment, the silence stretching between us, filled with the ghosts of 20 years of resentment. "I don't hate you, Lila," I said, my voice softer now, but carrying an unmistakable weight of finality. "I just can't have you in my life anymore." Her shoulders shook with a silent sob. "You need to learn how to live with who you are. You need to find your own light, instead of trying to extinguish everyone else's." I reached into my pocket and took out the key to the house. I placed it gently on the polished surface of the mahogany coffee table in front of her. The metallic click echoed in the silent room. "This is the last time I will be in this house," I said, speaking to all of them and to myself. I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I didn't look back. My footsteps were loud and even on the cold marble floor of the foyer. Each step was an affirmation. Each sound was the forging of a new boundary, solid and impenetrable. I walked out the front door, closing it softly behind me. As I got into my car and pulled away from the curb, a wave of pure exhaustion washed over me. The adrenaline was gone, leaving a hollow ache in its place. I felt drained. I felt pained. But underneath it all, as the perfectly manicured lawns of Potomac slid past my window for the last time, I felt something else, freedom. For the first time, the road ahead was entirely my own, but it was also completely empty. The road from that empty night in Potomac eventually led me here, 6 months later. It led me to a small log cabin tucked away in the quiet, rolling hills of the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia. My nearest neighbor is a mile down a gravel road. The only sounds are the wind sighing through the tall pine trees and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. The silence here isn't empty. It's full. It's peaceful. I didn't quit the agency, but I don't do field work anymore. My days of living out of a go bag and sleeping with one eye open are over. After the conference, Director Carter called me into his office. He didn't mention my family. He simply said my unique experience with complex human terrain made me the ideal candidate for a new role. I am now the head of strategic training for the next generation of case officers. I teach them not just tradecraft, but empathy. I guide them to understand that the most challenging decisions they will face are not simply about right or wrong, but rather about what serves the greater good versus adhering strictly to the law. I'm transforming my scars into valuable lessons. Every few weekends, Marcus makes the journey down from D.C. We relax on my spacious wooden porch, sipping on affordable beer, as the sunset transforms the mountains into a canvas of orange and purple hues. Our conversations are few, yet they hold a depth that transcends words. We simply cast our lines in the nearby creek, relishing the soothing ease of our quiet companionship. This, I've come to understand, is truly a place where one belongs. It isn't constructed with solid walls and confined by the heavy burden of anticipation. It's crafted with tranquility. It's characterized by understanding Marcus was right. I have finally discovered my path back to where I belong. On a cool afternoon, while I was going through the mail on my porch, I stumbled upon a letter. It was an unassuming, stark white envelope, devoid of any return address. Yet, I immediately identified the graceful, pointed angle of the script. It came from Lila. My hand quivered just a bit as I revealed what lay within. Within those walls, there was no drawn-out, emotional confession. There were simply no justifications. It was just one solitary, photocopied page. A formal announcement regarding the transfer. Lila had chosen to step away from her prominent role in D.C., seeking solace in a modest field office nestled in the Midwest. She was stepping away from the heart of influence, departing from the struggle she had fought so fiercely to conquer. At the very bottom of the page, a brief, handwritten note lay hidden. It expressed, "I'm discovering how to illuminate my own path. Thank you for revealing the shadows." I carefully folded the letter and tucked it away, preserving its secrets for another time. There was no exhilarating wave of success, no sense of justice served. A soft, lingering sorrow enveloped me, accompanied by a glimmer of hope for the sister I used to know. I came to understand that my legacy wasn't about ruining her career. Maybe, in a subtle manner, it served as the spark that encouraged her to begin creating a life that genuinely belonged to her. This morning, I rose before the sun had a chance to peek over the horizon. I brewed a steaming pot of robust, dark coffee and took my cherished mug out to the porch. The crisp air carried the earthy scent of damp soil and the refreshing aroma of pine needles. I settled into my rocking chair, observing the soft, early light of dawn slowly illuminating the shadowy outline of the mountains. I gazed at my hands, gently holding the comforting warmth of the mug. I ran my fingers over the silvery, raised line of the burn scar on my forearm, a lasting reminder of Operation Starlight. For years, I viewed these marks as unsightly reminders, proof of a life I felt compelled to conceal. But now, my perspective had shifted. They were not marks of harm. They were a reflection of my journey. They stood as a testament to the struggles I had endured, the decisions I had embraced, and the undeniable truth that I had persevered. I had come to a profound realization about my own value. Independent of anyone else's validation, my worth was not defined by a title on a wall or an image in a display. It was shaped by trials and darkness, and it belonged solely to me. I inhaled deeply, allowing the fresh, crisp morning air to fill my lungs. I had crafted this dawn entirely on my own, and as the sun finally crested the mountaintop, pouring golden light into the valley, a true, effortless smile blossomed on my face. I experienced a sense of liberation. The sun ascended, and for the first time in ages, I found myself not glancing over my shoulder. I was merely anticipating the moment when the light would reveal itself. My quest to discover my own light has reached its conclusion. Yet, I understand that for many of you who are listening, your own paths are still in the process of unfolding. My journey serves as a poignant reminder that our worth is not determined by the family we come from, but by the tranquility we create within ourselves. If my story touched your heart, I would be grateful if you could express your support by clicking the like button. I would be thrilled to hear your insights. So please share one thing that has empowered you on your journey in the comments below. Your narrative might be the beacon that guides another through their darkness today. Ultimately, if you're eager to explore more narratives of strength and self discovery, be sure to subscribe to the channel. I appreciate your attention.